Considering the amount of videos I've made to date about pop and rock song lawsuits, it's amazing really that I've never actually talked about Led Zeppelin before. Led Zeppelin are notorious for making it perhaps a bit too clear where their influences are coming from. On multiple occasions, Led Zeppelin have effectively taken other people's songs, changed a few elements, and then presented them as their own original songs. And it is true that on many of these occasions, I would say that the Led Zeppelin version of the song is actually an improvement. But you can't just go around taking other people's songs and not giving credit and royalties. So today we're going to look at 8 examples of Led Zeppelin songs that are based on other people's songs. Perhaps Zeppelin's most blatant lifting is their 1969 track Whole Lotta Love. The lyrics and vocal phrasing of Whole Lotta Love were lifted from Muddy Waters' 1962 track You Need Love, written by Willie Dixon.
Baby, way down inside, woman, you need love.
Way down inside, honey, you need it.
However, it wasn't actually the Muddy Waters recording of You Need Love that Zeppelin were lifting from. It was actually the Small Faces cover of You Need Love that Robert Plant was channeling when he came up with the vocal for Whole Lotta Love.
You need cooling, baby, I'm not fooling.
As you can hear, not only are the lyrics near identical, but the melody, vocal phrasing and style are also very similar too. In 1985, the similarities led to a lawsuit which was settled out of court in favour of Willie Dixon for an undisclosed amount, and Willie Dixon also received an official songwriter's credit on the song. It seems that Robert Plant was not particularly frustrated by the lawsuit though, claiming that he intentionally lifted the lyrics, knowing that he would only ever get sued if their song was successful. That was it, a nick, now happily paid for. At the time there was a lot of conversation about what to do. It was decided that, well, you only get caught when you're successful. That's the game. Whole Lotta Love isn't the only Zeppelin song you will find Willie Dixon's name on. Dixon is also credited on Zeppelin's 1969 track, Bring It On Home.
Bring it on home to you.
In fact, the song Bring It On Home was originally written by Willie Dixon in 1963 and performed by Sonny Boy Williamson II.
Gonna bring it on home to you.
6 years later, as a tribute to Sonny Boy Williamson, who had died in 1965, Zeppelin recorded their own version of Bring It On Home, however interspliced Dixon's song with their own original Zeppelin composition. Now, even though Zeppelin added their own original parts to Dixon's song, their version was still essentially a cover version. And of course, covering somebody else's song is not copyright infringement, assuming that you pay royalties and credit to the original songwriter, which, surprise surprise, Led Zeppelin did not. In 1972, Arch Music, who controlled the Willie Dixon song, sued Led Zeppelin and settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. And ever since that, any reissue of Bring It On Home by Led Zeppelin has been accredited solely to Willie Dixon. And interestingly, when Arch Music sued Zeppelin in '72, it wasn't only over Bring It On Home. The case also included Zeppelin's Lemon song, which Arch Music claimed lifted from another song they controlled, Killing Floor by Howling Wolf. And this is no surprise considering that the Lemon song actually started as a Led Zeppelin cover of Killing Floor.
I should have quit you a long time ago.
I should have quit you a long time ago.
In 1968, Zeppelin began performing Killing Floor live, and over the next year it developed into what would become the Lemon song. Although Lemon's song has diverged from Killing Floor lyrically and style-wise, the two songs are still very similar. As I mentioned earlier, Led Zeppelin had a bit of a habit of covering other people's songs and then subsequently adapting them into their own original compositions. For example, the Zeppelin track Dazed and Confused started as a folk song written and performed by Jake Holmes in 1967.
I'm dazed and confused, hanging on by a thread.
Been dazed and confused for so long, it's not true.
The Yardbirds, who were Jimmy Page's band prior to Zeppelin, covered Holmes' song the same year, and as you will hear, this Yardbirds cover was already quite similar to what would become Zeppelin's version of Dazed and Confused. When Jimmy Page went on to found Led Zeppelin, They recorded a new version of Dazed and Confused, which kept much of the instrumentation of the Yardbirds version, but included a new vocal line and lyric. Page and the rest of Led Zeppelin must have considered their version of Dazed and Confused far enough removed from the original Jake Holmes version that they didn't have to pay him any royalties or credit. However, unsurprisingly, Holmes did not agree with this point of view, and although it took him until 2010, he did eventually sue Led Zeppelin for the use of his song. The case was settled out of court with an undisclosed agreement between Holmes and Page, and ever since that, the Led Zeppelin version of Dazed and Confused has been credited to Page, inspired by Jake Holmes.
The Jimmy Page version is inspired by me, but there's still my version. It's inspired by nobody. It's just, I'm not inspired by Jimmy Page.
Another cover song that Zeppelin repurposed into their own song is Babe I'm Gonna Leave You. Zeppelin based Babe I'm Gonna Leave You on a song by the same name by folk singer Joan Baez.
Leave you when the summer comes a-rolling. Summer comes a-rolling.
Baez's Babe I'm Gonna Leave You was released on her 1962 live album, Joan Baez in Concert. And on this album it was accredited as a traditional tune, meaning that it was in the public domain. So when Zeppelin recorded their own version of the song, they too listed the song as traditional. However, seemingly unbeknown to them at the time, this song isn't actually a traditional public domain melody. It was actually written by folk singer Anne Breeden in the 1950s.
Summer comes a-rolling, summer comes a...
Eventually, Breeden received her credit on the Zeppelin and Joan Baez versions. The Zeppelin version is now accredited to Anne Breeden, Jimmy Page and Robert Plant. And Breeden was also reportedly reimbursed for the royalties that were owed to her. Yet another cover song that turned into a Led Zeppelin original is Zeppelin's Black Mountainside. Jimmy Page based Black Mountainside on Burt Jansch's arrangement of Blackwaterside. Jansch's record label did actually consider suing Jimmy Page over the similarities between the two songs, but the issue was that Blackwaterside is actually a traditional public domain melody. So even though the guitar arrangement that Jimmy Page had actually lifted was an original composition by Jansch, because the overarching song was in the public domain, the company chose not to pursue legal action. One of Zeppelin's most direct liftings is Rock and Roll's opening drum fill. This iconic drum intro is directly lifted from Little Richard's Keep a Knocking. The track Rock and Roll was born out of an impromptu jam that happened when Led Zeppelin were trying to finish their recording of Four Sticks. John Bonham kicked into the Little Richard drum beat, and then Jimmy Page joined in with a Chuck Berry-esque riff. Now, unlike the other example which we've looked at today, the borrowing in Rock and Roll didn't actually lead to any legal action. Perhaps this is because Rock and Roll is a clear homage to rock and roll artists like Little Richard, or perhaps it's because drum beats, unlike melodies or guitar riffs, are far less likely to be the subject of copyright infringement lawsuits because they're less distinctive. A Zeppelin song that did land the band in court though is Stairway to Heaven. In 2014, the band Spirit filed a lawsuit claiming that the iconic acoustic guitar intro of Stairway was lifted from their 1968 song Taurus. As you can hear, both feature a very similar arpeggiated chord progression in the key of A minor played on an acoustic guitar. Spirit argued that Led Zeppelin definitely would have been aware of their track Taurus when they wrote Stairway to Heaven, because Zeppelin actually toured with Spirit in 1968. And I do believe that Led Zeppelin probably took inspiration from Taurus when they wrote Stairway to Heaven. But is there actually enough similarities between these two tracks to warrant calling this copyright infringement? Well, in 2020, the case was finally settled and the court ruled in favour of Zeppelin. Although these two songs are similar, a common chord progression even if arpeggiated in a similar way and played on the same instrument, is not grounds for copyright infringement. As I mentioned at the start, this video is made in collaboration with the excellent YouTube channel Lilacs Music. Lilacs Music makes excellent videos looking at the story and history of classic songs, and as I said before, they've just released a video looking at the connection between Led Zeppelin and Nordic mythology. So do go check that video out and leave a comment letting Christian know that I sent you. And as always, a massive thanks goes to everyone who supports me on Patreon, including the names you see on screen right now, and Andre Sainz Diaja, Andy Deacon, Andrew Brown, Andrew Sussman, Austin Barrett, Austin Russell, Bob McKinstry, Whitney Parker, Cameron Allvilla, Colin Aiken, Chris Cabal, Christopher Ryan, David Rivers, Donald Howard, Dr. Darren Wicks, Elena Skorchenko, Eugene Leroy, FD Hodor, Greg Kabowski, Ilamola Toner, Hamish Brocklebank, Hernick Kutcher, Hugo Miller, Ivan Pang, Jake Fisher, James Ko, J.A. Kokensparger, John Dye, Josh Sanderlin, Justin Vigor, Lee Lauritsen, Mark Ziegenhagen, Max O'Keefe, Melody Composer Squared, Melanie Schoner, Michael Vivian, Nancy Gillard, Nathan Lawrence, Nathaniel Park, Paul Middleton, Paul Muller, Paul Pazel, Peter Dunphy, Richard Bride, Roger Clay, John Kennedy, Steve Daly, Stephen Lazaro, Tim Beaker, Homer Aharoni, Trisha Adams, Tim Payne, Victor Levy, Vidad Flowers, Vladimir Kodakov, Volti, and Waylon Fairbanks.